Well, do you ever wonder how does a 300,000 mile engine looks like on the inside? This is a 2009 Toyota Camry with the 2.4 liter 2A ZFE, which burns oil. But this Camry has 305,000 miles. It is manual transmission, and the owner loves it because they don't make a Camry in manual transmission anymore. So, in this video, we're going to remove this engine and fix the problem with oil consumption. And in the way, we're going to see how does a 300,000 mile Toyota engine look like on the inside after all these miles and years. Let's get started.
Well, let's settle down. Let's maybe pour ourselves a cup of coffee or some tea, which is my favorite. And let's talk about this 2009 Camry as you watch this engine being pulled out. So this Camry is owned by the original owner who bought it brand new in March of 2009. So they paid, and this is the best part, because this is a manual transmission, it is a CE, which is a very below base model. Basically, it doesn't have any really big options. They paid $15,770 for this car back in March of 2009. They traveled very far. They traveled from Illinois all the way to Florida to buy this car because they wanted a manual transmission. Believe it or not, this was the last years of the manual transmission in the Camry, at least in the US. So something about this car that the owner noted, because it's a manual transmission, because it's really doesn't have any options, it's the lightest weight Camry you can buy, they get a range of 665 miles on the tank. This car averages 37.5 mpg at 70 miles an hour with an 18.7 gallon tank. These were information from the customer themselves. The cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership, and this is a very detailed cost of ownership. This is an owner that kept records of everything, every little thing. The total cost of ownership over these 305,000 miles was $67,000. Some people hearts just skipped a beat. But let's see the math that the owner actually did for this car. So gasoline, 305,000 miles. He's going with an average of 28 miles per gallon. That's combined city and highway. It's a lot more on the highway, but that's the average he went with. 10,900 gallons at $3 per gallon. Average over the ownership time that he had it is $32,000. So really the biggest cost is gasoline. This car have had 4 sets of tires at $400 each. That's $1,800. Insurance for 14 years. The owner chose to have liability only. It's $400 a year. That's $5,600. This car have had 2 clutches. One of them is actually pretty recent at $1,800 each. That's $3,600. Oil changes. The owner did the oil change himself. $25 each oil change. 60 oil changes done at 5,000 miles each. $1,500. And then this car have had 3 batteries. Each one is around $100. That's $300. License and registration for 14 years at $100 a year is $1,400. Then there has been miscellaneous repairs, is what he noted them, $4,500 over the 305,000 miles. 2 drive belts, brakes twice without rotors, with rotors once, so a total of 3. Valve cover gasket was replaced. Alternator has been replaced. The power steering return line was replaced. Water pump once, which you'll see later in the video. We did not replace it because it was recently replaced. And then a big cost, 100 quarts of oil due to the defective pistons, which is the reason why we are pulling this engine out. 100 quarts of oil. This engine burns a quart every 150 miles toward the end of it. And you'll see exactly why when we take it apart. Cabin and air filters, 5 of each. And that's it. That's all this car have had in its entire life. Nothing with the suspension, nothing with the steering, other than the power steering return line for the power steering. The fuel injectors are original. The current tires, according to the owner, have over 100,000 miles on them. The transmission fluid have not been replaced per the customer request. It might have been replaced when the clutches were done, which I think is the case, because you don't want to have fluid go all over the place when you pull the transmission. But other than that, this is the maintenance of this car, which, if you really do the math, is not a lot. And here is the engine coming out on this car for the first time in 305,000 miles. And the only reason we're pulling it out is because of the oil burning, which is something that this engine was born with, not really something that does happen with age to this engine otherwise. And here's the engine almost out. We are fighting it a little bit because there's very little space, and I'll show you that in a little bit once the engine's actually out of the car. But this overall is not too bad of a job. We'll talk about costs of this job in a little bit. Here is that original flywheel coming out, which is pretty interesting. This clutch has been replaced like we've talked. That's why we're not doing anything with it in this video. And we're about to set up here, and we'll go back to the live video. Then we'll talk about the costs of this job.
So the engine is out. This was not too bad. I expected a lot more casualties. There was actually none, which is good. This engine doesn't have a lot of oil leaks. Majority of them looks like they were spills. Like you see oil, this oil right here. These are spills because there's nothing leaking this much, and it's way too clean for oil leaks. On this side, same thing, that oil probably just gets pushed back, but otherwise it really doesn't have any measurable oil leaks that we can speak of. It's in good shape, not too rusty. This is an Illinois car, but again, one owner took care of it, doesn't have a lot of rust. The one thing on the manual transmissions, they're usually tougher to pull out of the car because you have the nose of the transmission, the input shaft. You can see that right here. So normally, as soon as you, in the automatic transmission, as soon as you get it off, you can just pull it straight up. But you have the clutch in the way, and you have to clear all this, then go up. That's why I removed the water pump in the car, the tensioner, to give us as much room as possible. And it is a very, very tight fit. I mean, it comes up just touching the body here. You can see a few lines here where we move it, it touches the body right here. And then it's literally just coming face, but you can remove it. It is tough. You have to lift the transmission a lot higher than normal so you can give you that angle so you can go up. And this car have had rodent damage at some point. See it right here. It's interesting to see what's hidden behind the engine, but it's not a big deal, not a huge issue. It's just have had some rodents living here at some point. Doesn't seem, wires were all good. So we've already boroscoped this engine from before. That's when we set the appointment, probably 2-3 months ago. This needs a short block. And the owner I told him I am borderline on the short block. It does have some wear. We're gonna see it when we tear it apart, but we're getting a short block. But while we go through it, let me give you a sneak peek of that short block. This is a gasket kit, new spark plugs. We're not doing a water pump because it was done recently, and I can see it's a newer water pump. We're doing 4 ignition coil connectors because they're broken. We'll just replace them while we're there, while we have the harness out. And then the short block. Let's take a peek. You haven't even opened it. All right. Oh, do you look at that beautiful sight. This is a brand new Toyota short block 2AZ FE. It's not always necessary, and I told you guys, majority of these 2AZs, you can reuse the block, just put new pistons and rings when they burn oil. But in this case, with the miles, with the slight wear on the cylinders, and this car, just to give you perspective, it burns a quart every 150 miles. That is excessive. That is way too much. I'm surprised it lasted this long. Having said that, Let's tear into this engine. We're going to tear it completely apart. I will take a few of the pistons out so we can take a look at the crank, the rods, and just kind of get a general feel of how does an engine that has 300,000 miles actually looks on the inside.
Let's talk about the 2AZ FE. In case you have one, you want to know about this engine. We've talked about it before in other videos, but let's do a refresher. This engine came out in 2002. It's actually one of the better engines in my opinion. They did have a few issues at the beginning with threads pulling out of the block when they overheat and whatnot, but at this stage, 2009, they really don't have any issues other than what Toyota did to this engine in 2007. Low tension rings, which ended up causing a lot of problems, and now we have oil burning. They did a campaign to fix these, a limited time campaign, but of course this one is past it. Actually, the owner of this car did take it to the dealership at the time, and it passed, meaning it was not burning more than a quart in 1,000 miles. But of course, as it aged, that changed and things went downhill from there. But the thing about this engine is, it's actually a great engine other than this problem. And you see it here, 305,000 miles. You're about to see it. They just don't come apart that much. These engines are really well made, well engineered. Anything that's well engineered with good care, they last. And this one truly lasts if you take care of it. People have had their pistons replaced, the defective pistons. They've went extreme miles, and this engine just runs and runs and runs. They just don't have issues. And this is the beauty of this engine. It doesn't make a lot of power. It's nothing exotic or anything. It's just basic, simple, good engineering. It works, and it works very well for a very long time. I know it's ironic to say that when we're pulling that engine apart, but let's just remind ourselves. This engine has 305,000 miles. It's actually not a very difficult engine to take apart. Some cars are more difficult, Corolla, Scion TC, but in the Camry it's relatively actually DIY to a point if you're at an advanced DIY. And pretty soon we're almost done tearing it apart here. You'll take a look inside, we'll talk about everything, and then later when we're assembling the engine back up, we'll talk about costs of this job and some other considerations if you're ever in this spot.
So it's all apart. Let's take a look. And this is the reason, the first thing is the block. This is the reason why we're replacing the short block. Just look at the walls, at the cylinder walls. I mean, if you come around here and show them this side, the crosshatch is completely gone here. You still have reminiscence of it on the side, but otherwise, this cylinder is completely worn. If you look here, you can see some of the crosshatch. It's probably very difficult to see. There's a little bit of crosshatch here, but here is nothing. It's just worn completely solid. You do not see any crosshatch. Same thing here, no crosshatch here. And over here, if you come look at the side, like right here, you can see that shiny area. That's crosshatch, and the rest is just gone. So this is why this engine is burning oil. These are the two cylinders we took out. This is what I saw when I did the inspection. I mean, this is bad. This is very bad. The reason it did that is not because it has 300,000 miles, believe it or not. It's because this engine had this problem from day one. These rings are just, this is solid. It is not moving at all, the bottom one. And this is what really scraped the cylinder walls. But the interesting thing is, this engine burns an excessive amount. I mean, you cannot believe how much oil this engine burns. We're going to look at the rod bearings. 305,000 miles. Look at this rod bearing. This side is perfect. This side has a little bit of wear, and you can't even feel it with your fingernail. I mean, this would keep going, folks. This is a quiet engine. It did not come in knocking or anything. This is a normal wear. If we take this engine apart, we see wear like that, yeah, we're going to replace them. But if you continue to go on them, they're fine. And that's the scary part here. This is how well these engines are made. And let's look at the rod cap. See, this one has a little bit more wear, but we're not talking about wiped out bearings. This is just very, very minor wear here. Nothing crazy. I don't feel that with my fingernail. And then let's flip the engine around. Let's look at the crank journals. Now that we saw that way over there, Let's look at this crank journal. Again, nothing. I don't feel anything with my fingernails here. This is perfectly fine. And let's look at the other one. Again, nothing. This is how well these engines are made, folks. They really last a long time. I told you the 2AZ in a previous video, we did a Corolla one. I told you these engines, they're really good engines, but just had the problem of the piston design and the piston rings. Once you update them, they could really run forever. And here we are. The only reason we're not putting pistons and rings in this, and possibly rod bearings, is because the cylinder walls are worn. This has been going on, burning oil, and with these seized rings for a very long time. And this is the only reason we're putting a short block here. Obviously, some people at this point will stop. Wait a minute. Why don't we send this to get it machined? Why don't we do the... Look, by the time we buy pistons, rings, rod bearings, we send this out, which you're not supposed to machine it, but hypothetically, let's say we machine it. We send it out and we polish the crank, we do the... You're already almost at the price of a brand new short block that comes with everything brand new from the factory, with the updated pistons already and the updated rings. So this was a call that I gave the customer the option. I told him, look, we can go either route. I highly recommend we go the short block route, and I'm glad that they went with it. But now let's look at the cylinder head, because this is getting reused. Folks, you notice the oil on this is like ditch dark. People will say, well, this car is not maintained. That's actually not the case, because when you look close, all this oil is just standing there. It is not varnished into it. All this oil right here, this is all just standing oil. If we wipe it down, it's a clean engine. It's not in bad shape. Same thing with the cylinder head. We do have a little bit of varnishing here, but it's not heavy varnish. I still see plain color. Look at this, when I wipe it down, that's not too bad. This car did have very good service history. And the reason the oil looks this dark is the same reason you should change your oil every 6 months. We're not going to get into that debate too much. But when this engine burns this much oil, it is also low on compression. The rings are not holding well. And you have all kinds of fuel making its way into the oil. That's why we end up with this. There's a lot of combustion gases and fuel making its way into the crankcase that it just gets the oil this dirty. So all this will clean up perfectly fine. You won't even be able to tell anything. Let's look at the front of the cylinder head. Let's look at the valves. Obviously, this engine burns a lot of oil. We have all kinds of carbon caked up. So we're going to go ahead and clean all that. But you notice the combustion chamber is actually relatively clean other than this area. And surprisingly, the pistons as well. When you look at this piston, as much oil as this engine burns, this side is clean, this is clean. You got a little bit of carbon here. I mean, this is very impressive how clean this is, which tells you this car is driven properly. It is not driven short distances, always. I mean, look, just by me wiping it down, it almost looks new here. This is a car that's driven properly, not short distances and bad habits, good habits driving this car. The other thing we're going to look at are the cams and the cam journals. There's another area where with the 2AZ, you'll never have issues. So let's look at the cam journals. I mean, this is probably the worst one right here, but I can't feel this with my fingernail. Nothing. This is just a surface scratch, if that. And they're all basically the same way. This is completely normal. We're not going to go and replace an entire cylinder head for this. Again, some people say machine them. I will remind those people that this is a VVTi engine. You don't replace them. Camshafts, the journals. Again, we have the same story. If you come see this, I have nothing, nowhere at all. 305,000 miles. This is still in good service. This is a serviceable part. this is a part that's gonna go in and continue service, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We go back to the same thing. Something that is common with these is this gear wearing out. This one looks perfectly fine. We got pretty good teeth. Usually these teeth wear out, although it's more common on the 1AZ. These are fine. BVTI gear is fine. We don't have issues with it. I believe, I have reason to believe this might have been replaced at some point, but I'm gonna consult with the customer and see. Timing chain. This is where y'all are gonna have a laugh. My paint marks are there very clearly. This chain is actually good, and this is the best part. Guides, same thing. You do visually see that they have a groove, but it's actually a groove you cannot feel with your fingernail. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit so you can see it. Visually it looks like it has a groove, but I can't feel that groove. This guide is perfectly fine. The other guide, same thing. It has different appearance, but I don't feel this with my fingernails. It's perfectly flat. So this guide is good. The other tensioner, this is for the smaller chain. This chain doesn't really have timing on it. And again, this guide is perfectly fine. It does have that appearance, but it's not a groove, folks. It's just color difference. And the other chain also has color. This secondary chain is not as, it just turns the oil pump. It doesn't really do much. So here is that. That's going back. In these big jobs, you can't just go, oh, we're gonna get new everything. No, you have to also watch your customer's money. For example, BVTI gear. If this, after 2 years, goes out, well then we'll replace it. If a cam wears out after 3 years from now, well then we'll replace it. But we're not gonna go and double this build replacing parts just because. I'm not a parts replacer here. We're only replacing what needs to be replaced, which is the principal problem. This engine burns oil. If this engine did not burn oil, we would not be doing this. This would be still in the car, ready for another 300,000 miles. That's the bottom line here. With Toyota engines, you have to switch your mentality of thinking when you're rebuilding these engines or you're doing this kind of work. Don't go replacing everything in your way. That's just not cost effective. You're gonna end up going with inferior parts, aftermarket stuff, aftermarket this, aftermarket that, and you end up with worse parts than what you had. This is the problem I see all the time. So, having said that, we're done pretty much. I don't see any other damage that we're gonna do. We're gonna get the short block set up. We still gotta remove a few things because the short block comes with very little parts. Thermostat's been replaced. That is one thing we talked about. And we gotta swap like brackets, knock sensor, this coolant bypass pipe, and we'll get the new short block here. I'll start assembling this engine. We'll talk about it before it goes back in the car, and then we'll get going till we hear the start in this video.
Let's talk about the cost of this job. So the main, possibly the biggest cost is the short block itself. You're about to see that short block get installed, and we'll talk about it. Short block is a brand new short block from Toyota. You already showed you that, but you'll see it outside. Short block comes with everything pre-assembled, ready to go, crank, pistons, everything ready to go, just like you see it here, very nice and shiny. Now the question is, does this block has the updated pistons and rings? Yes, it does, and that's the main thing. I remember the time when this was happening and they switched to the new pistons and rings. You could actually not get the short block because they pulled all the current short blocks, and while they manufacture more short blocks that have the new updated parts, there's actually a shortage of them. I'm talking, this was years back, not today. Today they're readily available, and the price for the short block part from Toyota, you can walk in any dealership and buy it, is right around $2,100. Gasket kit was right around $400, just over $400. This is a gasket kit that has everything, every single gasket you need to do this entire engine rebuild. 2 gallons of coolant at right around $55. Tube of sealer were right around $20. The ignition coil connectors, which I will leave a part number in case you want them, they were right around $10. 9 quarts of oil. We did a double oil change, 2 oil filters, and then some cleaner, and then 4 spark plugs. Labor on this job was right around 20 hours, a little bit elevated. It is a manual transmission. There's a little bit more work. It's tighter. And the other thing that elevated the labor a little bit is more cylinder head work. We needed to check it more extensively, lap the valves, check everything. We spent actually quite a bit of time on this cylinder head just to make sure it's perfect, because we told the owner, I don't think we have issues with the cylinder head, but we won't know until we take it apart. So I wanted to make sure that the cylinder head is going to be in this car for at least another 300,000 miles, so we're not going to have issues with it. Of course, nothing lasts forever, but we did our due diligence. Everything checked out fine. I'm happy with it. Other than standard cleaning and valve guide seals, we didn't see any other issues. So that was good, because I was not expecting to add more cost to the owner. So I'm glad that went the way it did. Grand total for this job was just over $5,000, and some people's hearts will also skip a beat right now, but I can somewhat understand the logic of this owner. See, this owner doesn't want fancy features, doesn't want the fancy cars. He just wants his car. He's happy with it. It has served him very well. And yes, he could have gotten rid of it and gotten something else and moved on and got a more technologically advanced car, but he doesn't want that. He flat out told me, I don't want cars with options, because I'm not going to pay more for a car for options that I'll never use. And I understand everybody has their preference with options. I personally like cars with options. I like technology and I like to check it out, but that's not everybody, and that's not even the majority. He likes manual transmission cars. Actually, his other cars are beautiful. Second generation Tacoma. I really like that Tacoma. It's really in good shape, and you'll see it on the channel in the future. Rust-free manual transmission, again, with a 4-cylinder, which he really likes and wishes that 4-cylinder was actually in this car, but this engine is actually a good one. What do you do if you find yourself in this situation? You have an older car, it burns oil, and you're faced with a large repair like this. We're talking thousands of dollars here, and you're wondering, is this car worth it? Well, the first thing is, when I got this car, the owner knew what it needed, because he watched another video that I did, and he liked the way we do work around the shop, and he wanted us to do it. But the main thing I looked at was not the engine. Most people will be consumed by the engine. Most mechanics, actually, will be looking at the engine. What does it need? Actually, I spent not a lot of time in the engine. The engine's coming out anyways. We're really not going to get 100% of the picture until we tear it apart. I was focused on the rest of the car. Is it rusty? What else does it need? Does it need a lot of work? Is the rack and pinion leaking, and the struts are shot, and the brakes are horrible, and the car has holes in the floor, and the interior is all shot and everything? That's what I was focused on, not really the engine. The engine is getting repaired. This is how you determine if this is a car that is worth keeping or fixing, making it right, or is this a car that is too far gone and we're done? The main thing is, at least in our area, maybe you don't live in the Rust Belt and this is not a consideration for you, but the main thing is it rusty? Do we have fatal things that would kind of shorten the life of this car afterwards? Because if you spend $5,000 now and then 5 years pass before you have to do anything big, I think you were doing pretty good at that point. But if the transmission is slipping, let's say this is an automatic transmission, if the transmission is slipping and the power steering is all gone, and it's going to need a complete overhaul of the suspension, and then it has rust all over the place, and it's going to need a new exhaust, and it's going to need this, and it's going to need that, and this doesn't work, and that doesn't work, well, perhaps this is not a good idea to be putting money in the engine. But here's a car that literally, if it goes to a shop and nobody shows you the miles and tells you do a full inspection on everything, you will not find a single thing that it needs. The only thing that this car needed, and actually the owner will be bringing it back to the shop. We usually, when we do engines like that, we ask the customers to bring it back after 500 to 1,000 miles, break an oil change, and then it gives us an opportunity to double check Are all the hoses good? Zero leaks, no issues. Before they go on anything, we ask them to take it easy on the car during that time, just in case, because I'd rather fix a small coolant leak here from an old hose or something than have the customer go the full 5,000 miles and then something happens to the engine where now we're tearing into it again for something like that. It's just a good practice. Revisit the engine, make sure everything is good, everything is 100% before we give them the go-ahead to take long trips, drive it normal, and be just treated as normal. Nothing happened. So this car needs freer brakes. That's the only thing it needs. And actually, we do have that scheduled. And the owner actually wanted to redo the parking brake. The shoes are rusty. We tried to adjust it. It's not working. I told him, look, you use the parking brake a lot because this is a manual transmission. Let's redo the shoes. Let's put new hardware and everything will be good. Parking brake will work perfectly. We check the cables. Cables are good. But other than that, this car that has 305,000 miles is unbelievable, the condition that it's in. You see it here. The headlights are yellow, this, that, but not cosmetically. Mechanically speaking, this car needs nothing. The only thing that even the owner at some point wanted to, why don't we just do it? I told him, I don't see a reason to. The catalytic converter, and I'm surprised it didn't fail at this point or get clogged or something, because this car was burning a lot of oil, and that's the first victim. It's a catalytic converter, but not this car. Catalytic converter is fine. And usually when cars get a slightly clogged catalytic converter from oil burning, you'll drive it, it'll hesitate, and you'll feel it like it's not opening up, it's like choked. This one drives perfect. And usually I have to remind customers when we do jobs like this, don't be tempted by these cars. I remember the owner of a Corolla we did a while back, we did pistons and rings, same engine. He was tempted to drive fast, but I told him the first 1,000 miles, take it easy. Remember, there's a break-in period for these engines. But you're very tempted. You've been driving this car kind of compromised, low on power because it's burning so much oil. And all of a sudden, here's a brand new short block or new pistons and rings and the compression's back up. You're very tempted to do that. Don't do that. And this applies the same to new cars, by the way. If you're ever in this situation where your car needs large repairs, large amounts of repairs, or a single large repair like this one, if it needs a collection of things, you could always section it out, do one thing at a time. But when you have a single large repair, the first thing you look at is not the large repair, the rest of the car. Is this car worth the investment? Is this car showing signs that we're not going to have issues in the near future? That's the first thing you look at, and in my opinion, that's the only thing you look at to make your decision and do the right thing for yourself. And with that, let's go start this thing, see if it comes to life.
All right, so we have arrived at the moment. Everything's hooked up, fluids are in, we're ready to start it for the first time. But before we started, I left the crank position sensor off so we can crank this engine, prime it before we start it. This is going to prevent it from starting. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do that. Since this is a manual transmission, I actually have to hop in the car and press the clutch. Do that. All right. Now this battery is really not having it. We're gonna have to charge it. But oil light went off. Let's see if she has enough force to get us started here. Crank position sensor is plugged in. Let's do this. Well, it's running. Again, when you do a new engine, it's gonna take a minute. You notice it's not very smooth. It's gonna take it a minute to smooth out. Well, I don't see any leaks. Sounds pretty good. She's alive. This is an extremely happy moment for every mechanic. When you've done all this work, you start it, it runs, sounds healthy. Now it's only gonna smooth out from here on out. So folks, there you have it. This car, after this job, we're hoping we're gonna get another 300,000 miles out of it. This was a lot of expense, and I appreciate that the customer trusted us to do this job. So an opportunity to take an engine that has 300,000 miles, but runs good, sounds good. So what we have left on this car, of course, more cleanup. There's a lot of fingerprints and whatnot. We got to check it more extensively for leaks and put all the covers back, and then we're going to take it for a quick spin, and then we're going to do another oil change in case there's any debris left behind. We can take care of that before the car goes back to the customer. And more importantly, we have to clean the shop. This was too messy. You can see the floor. This is already driving me nuts here. But we also got to clean the shop, get ready. This is actually Friday over here. So this is the Friday project. We're going to wrap it up, drive it one more time Monday, and she's ready to go back to the customer. Hopefully ready for another 300,000 miles of service. And that's that. Folks, I hope this video was helpful, informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you have yourself a wonderful day.